Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now this is the MSI Nightblade gaming PC I made a video about a few weeks ago. I bought it for £149.99, admittedly way too much given the specs, but these are pretty hard to find these days and I thought it would be interesting to see what was inside. As it turned out, there was a whole lot of vape dust in here as well as some weak components, at least by modern standards. The Pentium G3258 was an overclockable beast back in 2014, but its two cores meant it aged rather poorly. The GT740 graphics card is also best left alone in 2022. Both of these parts were paired with 8 gigs of single channel memory and all in all made for an underwhelming gaming experience. Fast forward to now and the Nightblade has seen some improvements. As you can see, I do still need to do some cleaning though with this machine, as I haven't got all of the dried vape juice off of the bottom of the case yet, but I will do that before I sell it on. I've since sold the GT740 Pentium CPU and the single 8GB stick of memory for the net sum of £46.85. I sold the graphics card on eBay during an 80% off selling fees weekend, and the G3258 with the RAM went locally. After that, this machine then owed me £103.14. Never forget that you can lower the cost of upgrading an old PC by selling off the older parts first. For the upgrades then, and to start with, I bought a GTX 1650 Super, an OEM Dell one that looks ugly but is perfectly functional. A bit like myself. At £145 it wasn't the cheapest one I could find, but it came with a 24-month CEX warranty and it will work with the 350 watt power supply inside this thing. I also bought two matching 8GB sticks of DDR3. It was easier selling the single 8GB stick first that came with the system and then buying a matched pair afterwards. We now have 16 gigs of 1600MHz DDR3. Someone in the last video also suggested a low power S series processor too, and I took that advice on board, opting for a very cheap i7-4770S, a 65 watt chip with 4 cores and 8 threads. This also came from CEX and has a 24-month warranty. It was a steal at £28. The second-hand 240GB Maxtor SSD cost £18. This will be used as the boot drive. Altogether then, this Nightblade with upgrades after selling off the old components cost me £314.14. Not the best bang for the buck machine I've put together, and not the best pairing considering the i7 will likely hold back the 1650 Super, but it is miles better than what we had before, and it required minimal effort to build. So just how capable is it? The 65 watt i7-4770S is clocked at 3.1 GHz but still has a max turbo of 3.9. It's still pretty solid and is of course faster than an older desktop i7-2600 for example. I mention that because that's a popular CPU inside old Optiplexes that you can still buy for cheap. I found that for everyday tasks and some light editing it is still respectable, though it will be an obvious limitation in some games despite its inclusion of hyper-threading. That said, some of the following results were quite surprising. Cyberpunk 2077 for example does exhibit some frame rate dips because of the processor of course, but it still averaged 60 with medium textures and everything else on low. This is native 1080p with FSR disabled. Emptier areas will run a lot smoother, and to be fair, this ran way better than I thought it would. I kept checking to make sure FSR was actually off and that we were playing at native 1080p. I'll be testing the 1650 Super with a more powerful processor soon to see what it can really do in 2022, but so far, and in pairing with the aging 4770S, so good. I've spoken about Elden Ring on older processors before. It doesn't seem to like older architectures, but it still runs okay at medium. The low and medium preset run very similar in terms of frame rate and frame times, so I stuck with medium here. It's a good experience I think, but there will be some slowdown every so often. Spider-Man uses FSR 2.1 and to be honest it looks really good even when balanced mode is selected. AMD have done a fantastic job with this technology, so much so that it's hard to distinguish this upscaled resolution from native 1080p sometimes. The story here is similar as before. The average is decent but the processor holds us back a little bit. That doesn't mean the experience is bad by any means, but if you are thinking about buying a socket 1150 core i7 in 2022, you might find the 4 cores and 8 threads limiting in a lot of modern scenarios. For 28 quid though, well, it's really difficult to complain. Red Dead Redemption 2 will offer over double the frame rates that any console so far can deliver. Of course, it's still capped at 30 FPS on even the PS5 and Series X at this point in time, but a 1650 Super can handle nearly 70 FPS in combination with the i7. It looks great as well with the console equivalent settings. CSGO is more CPU intensive and is no problem to run here. The percentile lows, more specifically the 0.1% figure, reflects the frame drops that I kept seeing every time I died, which was a lot, and the game would sort of stutter as the camera zoomed in on the enemy player that just got me. That was about it in terms of noticeable performance hiccups, and we saw over 200 frames per second all in all. Apex Legends ran with the higher textures and TSAA enabled, but I kept everything else at its lowest. I don't see much point in cranking the settings way up in these online fast-paced multiplayer shooters, especially as the more frames we get, the better. That said, if you've got a beast of a graphics card that can handle a game without any visual compromise and still offer high frame rates, well, turning things down isn't always necessary. Here I thought that turning the textures up and adding some anti-aliasing gave us a nice combination of visual fidelity and performance with the 1650S. I took a similar approach in Modern Warfare 2, normal textures with anti-aliasing enabled. I played a few different game modes and combined the figures, which overall gave us a very nice average. The 1.1% lows were good too. I got this game free with my Intel Arc A750 from eBuyer, actually. I wanted to mention that as it was a nice surprise. It's the Battle.net version, not the Steam version, but what can you do, eh? Seriously though, I'm finding it pretty fun and it runs well here. Finally, we have GTA Online. A lot of you have said you'd rather see online than single player tested, but I can include both. If you want me to, just let me know. Online definitely runs worse with this system though than the single player experience does, but I was able to keep the settings at high with the detail sliders turned up about halfway as well. I think this is more CPU intensive in the case of this upgraded Nightblade. But there we go, the MSI Nightblade has gone from a old outdated low spec machine to a slightly less outdated but way more capable one, and it's not too expensive, or it wasn't too expensive to actually put together. Let me know what you think of the upgrades down below though, and as always, if you enjoyed this one, leave a like, leave a dislike if you didn't, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.